and welcome to Scuba Diving Magazine Accessories. The little bits and bobs and the gadgets and things that are useful for scuba divers are going to be my focus today, and I've carefully hand selected 10 things that I find quite useful and you can normally find inside one of my kit bags, whether that be for warm water diving, cold water diving, or a bit of both. A hat. Plain and simple on every single dive excursion. If it's cold, then a good beanie. I usually like merino wool. If it's sunny, then a wide-brimmed hat or a baseball cap. Baseball caps are amazing to keep not just the sun out of your face, but the spray and all sorts of things and the rain. So you're normally taught to protect your head when you're in the water with hoods so that you don't lose body heat out of your head, but as soon as you leave the water, a lot of divers just forget. They take the hood off and then just get on with de-kitting or whatever, but it's still important to protect your head. If you're on the surface waiting to be picked up, just in the water or surface swimming back to an exit point, then you have, like if you're in the tropics, that tropical sun just beating down on top of you, and a lot of divers actually wear a skull cap of some kind to protect them from the sun. They actually take it down with them in the water, or even wear it to control their hair, but also to protect their head throughout the entire dive. You will always find a good hat in my kit bag to protect my head from being either too hot or too cold, or just from whatever's coming from above. Dry bags are a scuba diver's best friend. Today you get a few types of dry bags, from thin and light bags that are great for inside your main bag to kind of organized kit inside. You typically get the smaller ones, like 5-litre bags, and they help to keep things dry when you're like rummaging around. I typically have one for my surface essentials like my phone, my wallet and keys and stuff. That's in its own separate little bag. Another one for tools and spares that I don't want salt water getting to, and a completely empty one for wet stuff after the dive to keep it all contained. You get heavier material ones that like reinforced tarpaulin bags. They're better for longevity because it's just tougher materials, but they're heavier, so not so good for traveling. Then you get dry kit bags and backpacks and duffel bag styles, which are really handy because all it takes is just a single rogue wave to just ruin your day and just soak all of your dry clothes. Or days after the dive, your car still smells of the ocean because your wetsuit that you packed away in your bag has leaked away on the drive home. So watertight bags help keep things dry, and they also keep wet things contained. Widely considered one of a scuba diver's most important pieces of equipment today is a delayed surface marker buoy. It helps keep you safe in the water so that boat traffic can actually see exactly where you are when you're under the water. Personally, I prefer closed DSMBs that don't have an opening at the bottom so that they only deflate when you want them to. Most of them have a valve that you can either inflate orally by blowing into them or with a BCD inflator hose. For reels, I prefer just a spool, a real basic spool. They're just more compact than a full-on ratchet reel. There's less moving parts as well. And for recreational dives, I tend to just carry a small 15-meter spool for the final safety stop. Make sure that it has a nice large leader on the end of the line so you can attach it onto things much more easily, and that the line itself is actually tied onto the spool properly at the other end, because there will come a time when you drop it accidentally, and of course you want to be sure that you can reel it back in. If you've ever had to do a stop in a mild current, or even just a busy anchor line, you'll know just how little space there is in that like 3 to 6 meter bracket at that perfect depth to do that final safety stop. And much like a drift hook, a john line can be really useful to attach yourself onto that line and then just step away from it a bit. Remain hands-free without having to swim constantly into the current, or of course take up too much space on the line so that 2 divers can take the same amount of space. John lines typically have like a V-shaped hook to tighten onto a rope without binding too tightly onto it that you can't remove it. They're very quick and easy to attach and then detach when you need to go. And if you dive somewhere with frequent currents, you can often just buy the metal head itself and then attach that onto the end of your drift line as well. If you've got a drift hook, then you can have both of them on the same line, or you can swap them over, or just have two completely separate lines. Either way, it's now multi-purpose, because a drift hook, trying to attach that onto a rope line isn't the best because it will slide up and down, whereas a John line won't. But for dives where you feel a bit like a flag, on that line, it's quite nice to be able to clip yourself off and just, be the flag for a few minutes. One of the first things that I started to keep in one of my pockets during a dive is a backup mask. You can manage without a lot of things in the water, and well, yes, you can finish a dive without a mask, but it's just so much better to be able to see properly and can either continue the dive or end the dive there. It only takes a moment to get your mask knocked off, or if you just like adjust your strap slightly and a small nick in that silicone strap turns into a complete rip, and now your mask won't stay on. It's real quick to happen under the water. Backup masks don't need to be overly fancy. A lot of divers, they get to a certain point and then they invest in a new fancy mask for themselves and then turn their original mask into their backup. Or if you already like your mask, or if you already have a fancy mask, then you just get a simple frameless mask as a backup. It's a good option because they fold down pretty flat. But with a second mask, you can save yourself or another diver a very uncomfortable end to a dive. The first time you wear dry gloves, you'll wonder why you've never used them before, and they just make so much sense because they're the dry suit equivalent to a wetsuit, and dry suits are so much more efficient at keeping your hands warm compared to wetsuits, so why wouldn't you want to keep your hands warm and dry? QB dry glove systems are probably the best at the moment for a few different reasons. The first being that they're a metal ring system, whilst most others today are just plastic ring systems, so they tend to be a bit more brittle. And also that there's a range of systems to suit your needs, from factory fitted rings that get fitted to the dry suit when it's being constructed. You can get half ring systems, complete ring systems, and just a range of different sizes as well, depending on the size of your mitts. By keeping your hands dry, they stay warm with much thinner insulation, so you can maintain your dexterity and actually feel what you're doing again in the water. Gone are the days of 7mm gloves that you struggle to put on without help because there's 14mm of neoprene between your fingertips to feel what you're doing. And dry gloves just pop on and off. They're real quick and simple, and you have the choice of just inner gloves and outer gloves as well. Outer gloves in a range of different colors and toughnesses depending on what you're doing, and you get different inner gloves for different amounts of warmth, so you can pick and choose for each individual dive. A small box or a bag with a handful of spares can literally save a dive, and it's really hard to MacGyver a replacement mouthpiece with what little you can find in the middle of the ocean. You can buy complete kits that are pretty universal, or you can buy and pull together each of the component parts yourself if you fancy. It tends to be a bit more customizable, or you get the more universal. It's really up to you. Most kits comprise of a replacement mask strap, because the silicone straps, they're pretty easy to rip, but easy to replace at the same time. It's hard to go diving without a mask strap though. Your mask just won't stay on your face, and yeah, they do tear from time to time. Replacement mouthpiece and zip ties. Yeah, breathing from a second stage with no mouthpiece is no fun, but do bear in mind that they do actually come in different sizes, so double check before you buy. A rubber fin strap. Now, we see few of these today with spring heel straps on fins, and they don't tend to fail as much or as readily as those older rubber ratchet straps, so do take that into account if you're looking to build your own. Handful of O-rings, the traditional ones, the ones that attach onto either the cylinder valve or your actual regulator, your DIN regulator itself. And I like to throw in an Allen key that fits on my specific port plugs for my regulator. Just do be sure that there's only one size, because sometimes there's two, depending on who's replacing port plugs, and an adjustable spanner. That should get you out of a lot of issues. One of the newer items that the scuba diving industry has adopted is ponchos. Not in the water, because that could be a bit messy, but during your surface interval. Much like a hat, protecting yourself from the elements between dives is important, and it can help prevent decompression complications as well. Ponchos also give you a mobile changing room, so you don't have to change down to your skivvies in full view of the public and then end up on some register somewhere. A nice, roomy, waterproof shell, sometimes with some insulation for colder climates, is great to just throw over yourself straight after the dive to protect yourself from the wind and the rain. And because you don't feel the cold as much, you're not tempted to hug a radiator after a dive, which can accelerate your decompression and actually cause you some issues. So your body is the best at knowing how quickly to warm yourself up at the correct rate, and the best you can do is to stop that heat from escaping, so just throw on a poncho. One pet peeve that I have with a lot of diving BCDs is that they have pockets that start like up here, and especially when you're diving with gloves, you're never going to reach that conveniently. I much prefer thigh pockets in the water. They're far easier to reach and you can store more inside of them. With jacket style BCDs, the more you put inside of your pockets, the less they can inflate without squeezing your rib cage, and I don't want to sacrifice buoyancy for storage. You have a few options with thigh pockets, from drop-down pockets that clip to a D-ring on your BCD just down on the side. You usually have a D-ring around by your hip, and then the actual pouch itself just straps onto your leg. Wetsuits and dry suits with built-in pockets, they're a no-brainer. And if you don't have either of those, then what are usually called tech shorts. But look for attachment points inside. You want a D-ring or at least some bungee loops and a nice closure mechanism. Zips kind of bug me in the water. They get the job done, but with soft materials, it can be quite tough to zip it back up again. But personally, I prefer Velcro. Another fairly recent adoption to the scuba industry, and one of those concepts that we actually used to joke about when I was being an instructor as, oh, you know what would be really useful? A bit like a warm air button on a dry suit, that would be really useful, was like wing mirrors, to be able to glance behind you during a dive without, turning around completely. And someone made it. I imagine a dive guide sort of came up with that concept as well and then actually made it. It's very useful if you're leading a dive to be able to check that people are still behind you and they're still keeping up. You're not just swimming off by yourself. Or if you have an elusive buddy that likes to swim up in your blind spot, it's nice to be able to just make sure they're still there, and rebreathe the divers as well for bubble checks at the start of the dive, just to kind of do a quick check yourself before your buddy swims over to you. Sometimes it's just handy to be able to see what's going on behind you and to be able to, just check to see if everything's okay. And those are 10 handy things that I like for a dive, but what are some handy things that you can think of? Are you partial to an EPIRB, just in case? Pop any ideas that you have down in the comments below, and remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. After that, head over to app.scubadivermag.com to check out a new digital version of one of our latest magazine editions. It's something new that we're testing out. So yeah, head over and sort of see how you get on. Let us know if you come across any issues. But thank you for watching, everybody, and of course, safe diving.